Hi friends, welcome to the Plain Fun RC channel. I'm your host Saul, and we are continuing with the build of the ESM DO335. Working on the wings right now. The ailerons are pretty straightforward. They're just regular CA hinges, nothing too complicated there. The flaps themselves use a pin hinge, and you can see there that the one on the right is actually the pin hinge it came with, and for some reason they were all cut. One side was cut. I don't know why. So we had to pull them all out and went ahead and switched over to some Dubro hinge pins with a cotter pin, and very straightforward installation. The most important thing you want to remember is just make sure that the actual center line lines up with the edge here of the flaps. All right, let's get those glued in place and more to come. All right, friends, as we continue our update, you can see that we're about ready to mount the aileron servo to our servo plate that'll be used to go ahead and mount it to the wing itself. Now, you'll notice when we look at our plate, we've got quite a few lines drawn here, and I want to talk about those lines and why they're important. So when you go through and are preparing the servo plate to mount the servo, you have these servo blocks that you can see here. Now, when you're putting your blocks on, it's very important that you position them correctly, because we have here our plywood ring, and our plywood ring is what's used to mount the actual door to the wing itself. So when we position our blocks, we want to make sure we position them in such a way that they are not affected by the plywood ring when we go to mount the door to the actual wing itself. So in order to determine where the proper placement is located, you're going to want to use some type of slide ruler, preferably something with a 90 degree, as you can see here, okay? And then just take this portion here, put it up against the edge of the plate here, and then just simply adjust your ruler accordingly. And then once you have the proper measurement, you can then take this measurement here and simply transfer it to the door like so. And that's all there is to it. And then that way you'll be able to properly position your blocks. So just keep that in mind, and I hope that tip is helpful, and more to come. All right, friends, as we continue our update, we're about ready to install the flap servo. So I was looking through my servos to see what I had that I could use, and I realized I had an aircraft retract servo. And I discovered something interesting about the servo. Watch how slow it moves. And that's perfect for flaps. You need a servo that's going to move nice and slow. Of course, you can always adjust the speed of the servo in the flap setting within your computer radio, but I thought this would be perfect. And this one has 260 ounces of torque. So some of the folks may not be familiar with why there would be aircraft retract servos. Well, before electric retracts, before pneumatic retracts, there were mechanical retracts. So in order to move the mechanisms within the mechanical retract, they had servos, and they would purposely design the servo so they had slow movement, so that way when the retract would retract, it would move slow, much like the full-scale aircraft. And this one has 260 ounces of torque, which is perfect. So we're going to add that in there into the wing and use that as our flap servo. All right, friends, more to come. All right, friends, we've got our flap servo installed on our servo blocks, and now the servo is installed on the wing. All right, friends, we've got our servos installed. Our focus now is putting on our control horns and our flap and our aileron. More to come. All right, friends, as we continue our update, we've got our aileron and our flaps all set up. And just a quick mention here, we're using just a standard Z-bend for the servo, and you can see we're just using a standard screw horn for the control horn itself, so pretty straightforward. And you can see everything just works absolutely fantastic. And, of course, our flaps as well. Perfect. All right, friends, more to come. All right, friends, as we continue our update, we're about to go ahead and shift our focus to installing the landing gear. Let's talk about what's available. So right off the bat, one of the nice things about the kit is they include the ability to go ahead and install fixed gear. They include these mounting blocks and, of course, the fixed landing gear as well. Now, the reason why I have both wings out is because you can see we've gone ahead, we've started clearing off the covering on this wing over here. Now, if you were installing the fixed landing gear, you would just need to clear off the section over in here, and that's all you'd have to do. But we're going to go ahead, we're going to take the covering, and we're going to remove all the covering that is in the wheel well, just as you see over here. Now, one of the things we need to do is once we've gone ahead and we've removed the covering, we do have these plastic wheel wells. And what we're going to do is we need to remove the section that's here. And you can see the line here. We're going to follow that line, cut it with a pair of scissors, and then this plastic wheel well will get epoxied in place. So let's go ahead, let's clear our covering, let's get our wheel wells in place, and install our landing gear. More to come. All right, friends, as we continue our update, we're working on installing the retracts. Let's talk about what we have going on here. First and foremost, you can see the stock wheel well that this comes with. And the stock wheel well, as you can see, is nice and straight. There's no notches. The only notch that's cut out is the one we're supposed to cut out here. And, of course, you trim off some of the excess as well. Now, you can notice here the wheel well that we've had to use with the robot retract. Now, the reason why we've had to make some cuts here to help clear the oleo hinge itself is because the wheel wells were made for the ESM retracts. They were not made for Robart or Sierra Giant scale at all. In addition to making the cut here on the actual wheel well and on the wing itself, we also had to go through and make some additional cuts, which you can see there on the wheel well as well. So the other issue is what we're going to have to. So what we're going to do is we're going to wind up going through and actually cutting the wheel well itself. We need to clear that out of the way, because what happens when the robot retracts, the wheel itself is pushed up against this part here. And that's not good, because there's going to be a bit of space between the wheel and the actual retract. So therefore, there's not enough clearance in here. So we're actually going to, we're going to have to cut this part of the wheel well out. So, which is not a problem. It's got gear doors, so I'm not too concerned about that. One of the things we are going to do here is we are going to build up a little bit here to help fill this area in a little bit, so this isn't open. Because when the door is put in place over top of the retract itself, you can see there is still that opening right here. So we're going to have to build that up and fill that in a little bit with some way, somehow. So anyway, so we're going to go ahead and take our wheel well. We're going to install it. I thought about building up a wheel well, which wouldn't be too difficult. But I thought, you know what, I just want to get this done because I've been contemplating this for the past couple days. So let's go ahead and get our wheel well glued in, and hopefully we can get our retract working properly with the clearance that's needed here in the wheel well. More to come. All right, friends, as we continue our update, you can see we've got our wheel well in place. Let's talk about what we did. So when you go to glue the wheel well in, don't try to glue it in all at once. Do it in sections. Start with this section here, let it dry. Then go ahead and do this section right here and let that dry. And then go ahead and do your front. Now, your front will need to be done all in one piece, but that's not difficult. What I did find, though, is that I guess it's the way that they molded the wheel well. They didn't mold this front portion so that it sat nice and flush. So I had to use number 2 servo screws to hold that in place, and it worked out really well. Also, you're going to need 2 little screws right here while the glue is drying to help hold the wheel well on the inner rib right here. So just something to keep in mind. But you have to take them out, because you're going to have a gear door over this section. Now, the other thing that you need to do is you're going to have to remove this portion of the wheel well, as you can see here where the tire sits, because it's just not deep enough. And you're going to need to sand away a little bit of this rib, not too much, but just enough. Sand away this rib so that way that the actual tire can clear, so the retract can retract fully. All right, all that's left to do is get our wood, fill in our wood right here on this portion here, and then pass our wire through, and then we need to trim our axle. As you can see, the robot axle is very long, and they do that on purpose. And we've determined that we need to take off roughly about that much right there, and I'll show you how you can determine the length of the axle. Let me retract the gear, and you'll see what I'm referring to. And if you look carefully, let me see if I can tip this up. There we go. You can see how the axle sits up a little higher, and that's how we were able to determine the length. Don't forget, you've got to have some space between the wheel and the actual strut itself, so that the wheel is able to spin freely. So just keep that in mind. All right, we're going to go ahead. We're going to trim our axle, and then take care of the other things I mentioned, and start working on putting on our gear door. More to come. All right, friends, we continue our update. You can see we've gone ahead, we've mounted our wheel on there, and went ahead and trimmed our axle, and we have our spacer here as well. Wheel spins nice and freely, and then we've gone ahead and we've started filling in our section here that we had to cut away for the oleo strut, and now we're going to go ahead and cover it. And now it's covered. as you can see here. We had some extra covering left over when we went ahead and removed the covering from the wing, so that way we could go ahead and install the retract. All right, our next step is to go ahead and get our gear door in place. As you can see, it's a perfect fit. The hole that we cut is very small, which is great. And the nice thing about the kit, they give you this bottom half of the gear door, so we can actually attach a gear door to the fuselage to go ahead and fully cover it up. And I even saw a gentleman who found a way to go ahead and cover up the bottom part, which I would like to do. I want to give this a nice, clean look, get as much speed out of this thing as possible. All right, friends, we're going to shift our focus to the other wing, and more to come.